Good morning, everybody. My name is Anthony Kazazis, and I am the director of the NYC Network Group, as well as the NYC Real Estate Expo. And I want to thank you for registering today for today's webinar, Using the BRRRR Strategy to Build Your Real Estate Portfolio by RCN Capital. As an active real estate professional, you probably encountered the acronym BRRRR, which stands for Buy, Rehab, Rent, Refinance, Repeat. While you may have an understanding of this investment strategy, how do you successfully execute this strategy and set yourself up for long-term success? Here today, we have Connor Hibbs, a business development coordinator who joined RCN Capital in the fall of 2019. He brings an adept critical thinking skills, superior communication skills, and a desire to build and maintain strong customer relationships. Connor's mission is also to amplify RCN's presence in the local and national markets. Connor will go over each month a 3-part webinar series that will take a deeper dive into how to successfully navigate this process so that you can grow your relationship and your real estate, of course, portfolio. Part 1, he'll discuss today about buy and rehab. Part 2, next month, he'll discuss rent and refinance. And the last month, the 3rd month, he'll discuss repeat and build your empire. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you, Connor Hibbs from RCN Capital. Welcome, Connor.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm excited to go over this strategy with everybody. I think there's going to be a lot of potential here for people to really grow their portfolios using this. So I would like to introduce you to the first part of the 3-part webinar series, how to utilize the BRRRR strategy. So in part 1 today, we're going to be going over the buy and rehab. So we're really going to be taking a deeper dive into RCN's ARV program and how drawing rehab funds works. So again, I'm your presenter today. My name is Connor Hibbs, and I'm a business development coordinator over here at RCN Capital. So I'd like to start off today by going over what exactly we're going to be covering. So today we're going to be looking at what exactly it is that RCN can lend on, how you can close the fastest with RCN, and then understanding the draw process. And then in the end, we're just going to be putting all of that information together. So as we start, I thought it'd be a good idea to go over what exactly the BRRRR strategy is. So BRRRR is an acronym for Buy, Rehab, Rent, Refinance, and Repeat. So today we're primarily going to be looking at the buy and rehab aspect of this. Now, just to give you a general idea of where RCN is able to lend with this program. So everything you see here on the screen that's green is a state that RCN is able to lend on with this program. All of the states in blue, so Alaska, Nevada, Minnesota, Vermont, North Dakota, and South Dakota, we do not currently lend with this program. So the reason largely for the majority of these states, really the only exception is going to be Nevada here for this, is that there really just isn't enough volume for it to make it worth it for RCN to buy it for the licensing. Now for Nevada, they just have really extreme licensing requirements, such as having a brick and mortar building, as well as a resident of Nevada working there. But everything you see here in the green is a state that we're going to be able to lend in for this program. Now, just to briefly go over what RCN's loans can be used for. So RCN's loans can be used for purchases, purchase and rehabs, refinance, and cash outs. Now, for the purpose of this strategy, we're primarily going to be looking at the purchase and rehab aspect of it. So RCN loans, we can only lend if the property is going to be non-owner occupied. So we can't do any sort of partial occupancy. So just to kind of briefly describe what exactly partial occupancy is. So if the borrower has, say, a 3-unit property, they want to live in 1 unit and rent out the other 2, that's not something we'd be able to do. If it's a 100-unit property, the borrower wants to live in 1 unit and rent out the other 99, unfortunately, that's not something we'd be able to do. Another scenario that comes up a little bit less or a little more often would be if a borrower is looking to purchase a property, hold it as a rental, and then use it for, say, 1 week or 1 weekend a year as a vacation home. Unfortunately, that's not something we're going to be able to do. Really, the goal is to have the borrower at the property as little as possible, but the real deal breaker would be we can't have that borrower spending a night in the property. So as long as that doesn't happen, then it's going to be okay. Now, we can lend on 1 to 4 units, single family residencies, condos, and townhomes. The minimum purchase price that we're going to be able to work with for that is going to be $50,000, and that's going to be a hard price floor. And we can go up to 2 million. Above 2 million, we can still kind of do it. We're just going to want to look more at the property itself, make sure it's something that would make sense for us to lend on, as well as for the borrower to maintain profitability. Now, with these price floors as well, I do want to just mention really quickly. So for the 1 to 4 units, the way that we're going to be looking at the minimum purchase price required is going to be for 1 and 2 units, we're going to be looking at a minimum of $50,000. For 3 units, the minimum purchase price is going to be $75,000. And for 4 units, the minimum is going to be $100,000. Now, we also can lend on this program for 5+ unit properties and mixed use properties. I would like to mention briefly that for the second part of this strategy, the rent, refinance, and repeat, we do not currently have long-term programs available for 5+ units and mixed use properties, but this is still a great program for renovating and rehabbing one of these. And we also do offer 3-year programs for refinancing on these. Now, just to touch into the 5+ unit. So with the 5+ unit, we're going to want to see a minimum per door average of 50,000. So if it's 5 units, 250,000. If it's 8 units, we want to see it appraised at least 400,000. And with the mixed use properties, we are going to want to see that the property appraises at least 51% residential by square footage. Now, we do also want to look into what the commercial tenants would be for this property. So some commercial tenants that we would not be able to work with would be things such as bars, restaurants, doctors' offices, laundromats, anything that really has a possible chemical hazard. So tenants that we'd love to see in there would be things such as retail stores or office spaces. Now, diving a little bit deeper into RCN's ARV program itself. So with the ARV purchases for single family properties or 1 to 4 units, we would be able to do purchase prices or up to 90% of the purchase price plus 100% of the rehab, so long as the total loan value doesn't exceed 75% of the after repair value. Now, this is going to be really important. This next part is the no prepayment penalties with this program. Now, the no prepayment penalties, obviously that's something that's nice to see, but the real important part of it is that it allows the borrower to move as quickly as they want with the property. So if you can rehab the entire property in 3 months, you're good. You can refinance out of that right away. You can get your money back in a cash out refinance, get a lower rate, and you'll be on your way. Now, this is also really important, not just for the borrower themselves, but also for RCN, because being able to see that the borrower is getting it done quickly also shows that they're able to sort of increase their profit margin. That's a couple months less of interest payments that they would have to pay. They're getting their work done faster, and they're able to turn around and do it again, which is also very nice. Now, for this program, it's going to be a 12-month term with a 6-month extension available. Now, I would like to touch on the 6-month extension real quick. So while we can do the 6-month extension, it's not something that we see happen very often. Typically, rehabs will take between 4 and 9 months, depending on the experience level of the borrower. And really, we only see these 6-month extensions if it's going to be a much larger property. For example, it takes much longer to renovate a 20-unit property than it does to renovate a 1-unit property. So that's one of those areas that, as long as the borrower is communicating with their loan officer, we wouldn't have a problem adding on that extension. Another sort of circumstance that we would be able to do that 6-month extension is, say, if there's inclement weather that impacts the process of the rehab. That's also something where, as long as the borrower is keeping communication with their loan officer, they're not telling them a few days before the loan is supposed to expire, hey, I need an extension. As long as they're communicating with them, giving us updates, showing that they are at least trying to get some of the rehab done, they're not just waiting until the end to ask for it. Those are all going to be things where it's going to be okay to get that extension. Now, the rates for this program are going to start at 8.25%, and the minimum FICO score that we're going to be able to work with for this is going to be 650. Now, we are able to work with new investors as well as experienced investors. So if you are new to this, you want to get your first property under your belt, don't worry, it's not a problem. We're still able to work with you. Now, I will say, though, that the experience does have an impact on the leverages and interest rates for this program. So what RCN considers to be new investors are going to be investors that have held 0 to 2 properties in the last 3 years. Now, if you fall under this category of a new investor, then you would be looking at being able to get up to 80% of the purchase price plus 100% of the rehab, so long as the total loan doesn't exceed 70% of the ARV. And rates for new investors are going to start around 10.49%. Now, for intermediate investors, these are going to be investors that have held 3 to 10 properties in the last 3 years. They're going to be eligible to receive up to 90% of the purchase price plus 100% of the rehab, so long as that total loan does not exceed 75% of the ARV. And the interest rates for this program, or for this level of investor, are going to start around 8.75%. Now, for the experienced investors, so those borrowers who have 11 plus properties in the last 3 years, they're also going to be able to get up to 90% of the purchase price, as well as 100% of the rehab, so long as the total loan doesn't exceed 75% of the after repair value. And their interest rates are going to start around 8.25%. So just to do a quick example of what a loan with this ARV program would look like. In this scenario, the borrower's property is going to be a purchase price of $500,000. They're looking to put $100,000 of rehab into that property with an expected after repair value of $750,000. Now, in this property, it's going to be a single family residency. The borrower is going to have a 700 FICO score with 4 experience in the last 3 years. So in this scenario, the initial advance is going to be 87.5% of the purchase price. So that would get you $437,500 from that initial $500,000 purchase price. And we're going to be able to do 100% of the rehab with this. So the rehab budget would be $100,000. So the total loan itself would be the $437,500 plus the $100,000 of the rehab budget, giving you a total of $537,500. which, if you divide by the after repair value to determine the LTV, would give you a 71.7%. Now, the interest rate in this scenario would be roughly 8.49%. So that's just a general idea of what these loans would look like leverage-wise and rehab budget-wise and interest rate-wise. Now, going over how you get the loan. So this is going to be RCN's process for these loans. It's really going to start out with the borrower submitting the application, giving us details about the property, details about the borrower. From there, we'll look at it. If it's something we think we'll be able to move forward with, we'll go into processing. That's where you're going to be able to receive your document list from your loan officer and processor. Now, for part 3, the appraisal and review, this is really the most important part of this process if you're trying to get this loan closed quickly. So the appraisal is far and away the longest part of the loan process currently with RCN. It's going to take about 2 to 3 weeks on average is kind of what we're seeing right now for that appraisal to get back. Now, while we were waiting on that appraisal to get back, that's where you really need to hammer down on that document list. Make sure you get everything in. If there's any sort of discrepancies, if there's something where we need more information, say an example would be if we need a feasibility study because it's going to be a large expansion, something along that line, that's something we'll be able to take care of prior to the appraisal getting back. Because once we get that appraisal back, as long as we have all of the documents that we need, we could submit that loan right into underwriting. And from there, it'll be about another week. So once we get it into underwriting, we make sure we have all of the documents we need. Everything looks good. The loan will go through approval and closing. And then from there, it will enter servicing. So just to briefly give you a list of some of the documents that we're going to need to start for this loan process, these are things you're going to see almost every time on that document list. So it's going to be things such as the purchase and sales agreement, articles of incorporation, the operating agreement. We're going to need to know the point of contact and see a photo ID. We're going to want to look at the rehab budget. And I would like to mention that the more detailed your rehab budget is, the better, for numerous reasons. It helps us as the lender because we'll get a better idea of what you're going to do. As we go through the draw process, it'll be much easier to figure out what percentage of work has been done. It's also going to be better for the borrower, not just because they'll have a more solidified game plan going into it, but when that appraiser comes in and they look at the rehab budget to determine an after repair value, it's very difficult to get a good idea of what a property is going to look like if you just throw in an imaginary $30,000. Now, if that borrower gives them a rehab budget where they say, okay, we're getting a new deck in the back, we're doing all hardwood floors, we're getting granite countertops and new appliances, that makes it much easier for that appraiser to give them an accurate depiction of what the after repair value would be. So we're also going to be looking for the entity status, and then we're going to be looking at the EIN letter. So the EIN letter, just to briefly describe what that is, it is the number assigned to your LLC by the IRS. So this is going to be used primarily to make sure that we are dispersing funds to the proper LLC. For example, there could be dozens of 123 Main Street LLCs. Really, this number is just going to make sure that we're dispersing and working with the correct entity as we go forward with the process. We're also going to be wanting to see the letter of explanation, or the LOX. So an example of something that you could write down on a LOX would be if there is a sudden increase or addition to your budget or your bank account of 100,000, we would want to know what that is. It would be as simple as saying, I sold a property, this is the income I got from that. So that's why we want to see that LOX, or letter of explanation. We're also going to want to see the title company contact information, and we're going to be wanting to look at 2 months of bank statements. So taking a look at what the draw process is and how it works. So with the draw process, the way that RCN does it is the borrower will actually initiate the rehab with their funds. From there, we're going to be taking a look at what funds have been used, what percentage of work has been completed, and from there, say the borrower completes 20% of the rehab on that first go, we would send out an inspector, they would take a look at it, confirm it, and then we would send that borrower back 20% of what their allotted rehab budget was. So the way that you request these draws is you're going to want to submit the request about 3 to 5 days before you want the inspector there. You can either email draws@elitecommercialservicing.com, which is our servicing branch, or you can fax them at 860-760-6922. And you're just going to want to make sure that when you submit that request, that you also attach a completed draw request wire form, as well as signed contract lien waivers. So to take a little look into what the actual draw process cycle looks like. So step 1, the borrower is going to request a draw, and then we will be contacting a third party for the inspector. From there, about 1 to 2 days after the request, the borrower is going to be getting a call from that inspector. They will set up a time for the inspector to come out. Typically, the appointment will be 1 to 2 days after the call. From there, Elite Commercial Servicing, or ECS, is going to receive the report about 1 to 2 days after the inspection. And then the borrower should expect to receive the funds 1 to 2 days after ECS gets that report. And as they continue to complete rehab, that's going to be the cycle that this goes with. So I would like to take a moment now. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer some of them. I do have some other common questions that we can go over as well, but if there's anything as of now that anybody's curious about or wants to know, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Can you tell us about the difference between RCN and maybe other companies that do offer this strategy? Tell us, how long have you guys been doing the BRRRR strategy program, and also your success rate, and how many are you seeing on a monthly or a yearly basis that are using the system in closing?
So the BRRRR strategy is actually a two-part program. So basically, you would initiate it by using this ARV program to complete rehab on the property. And then you would be using a second program, our 30-year long-term program, to refinance out in order to get a lower interest rate on it. That's also where you would use the cash out to go ahead and pursue further properties to repeat this strategy. This strategy is very successful. It's really it's almost kind of foolproof as long as you can make sure that that property has tenants who are paying, because the real mindset behind this strategy is that you'll purchase the property, you'll rehab it, and then once you get that renter in there, as you refinance out into that longer term program, the income that you'll be getting from that tenant will be paying off the loan that you have for the refinance, as well as providing additional income. And as you take that cash out refinance, you can use the money that you pull out from the equity on the property to go ahead and purchase another property. So that's really the way that that long-term or large scale works. As for how many we see a month, I don't have an exact number, but it's a good amount of people that are looking to rehab these properties and then go into a long-term refinance. It's become more common than the classic fix and flip where they sell off the property. What was the rest of that question? I apologize.
It basically was a question like, how long has RCN been offering this BRRRR strategy program?
I guess the simple answer to that would be since we've had the ARV program and the 30-year program. Really, it's more of a strategy as opposed to getting into one program and following that. It really comes down to the borrower's decision after they rehab the property, if they would rather go with selling off the property and just taking those funds and doing what they want from there, or if they want to create long-term income using that property in the form of long-term rental income.
We have an anonymous attendee. Is there a cost for the rehab inspector?
Yes, so that's actually one of the common questions. So I'll actually hop over to this next slide. So with the rehab inspection, there's going to be an inspection fee of $199 and a wiring fee of $25. So a total of $224 for every draw. Now, this isn't something that we're just springing on the borrower as they need their inspections. This is something that's going to be allocated into the rehab budget itself. So that's something that will just be withdrawn from the rehab budget as opposed to having the borrower need to pay a fee every time they go in. This is something that will be factored into that rehab budget.
Great, thank you. We have another anonymous attendee. Also, how much can I request in a rehab draw?
So there's really no limit. It is a strategy for some borrowers because the way that the rehab budget works, especially with the interest payments, is we're only going to charge interest on money that's been used. So it's not totally uncommon for a borrower to try to do most of the rehab themselves, not have to pay any of those interest payments on the rehab budget, and then collect the rehab budget right near the end of the process. That way, they're really cutting their costs on how much interest they have to pay, but still getting the money for the rehab. So I guess the short answer is there's no limit to how many draws or how few draws you can do.
Roat Malik, the borrowing rates go into effect at the time of the draw, at the time of approval, or at the time of completion of rehab. So he's asking when it does go into effect, the time of the draw, the time of the approval, or the time of the completion of the rehab.
So I'm assuming that this question is referring to where the interest rate is being factored into parts of the rehab budget, like when you have a draw. So the interest
Correct.
is going to be impacting that part of it after you take the draw. So once that draw is sent, the next cycle for the interest payments, that's where that's going to be factored into there.
We also have from Nancy, what happens when there is not a tenant in the property? Is there a grace in the paying back until a tenant is in place? Since this is a special program, are you are you offering you are offering knowing the payment is dependent on having a tenant?
So with the tenant, and I'm assuming this is more towards the refinance aspect of this. So with the tenant, really, you're going to want to have a tenant in there. And the biggest reasoning for that is that having that property occupied, especially with the long-term program, is going to be able to get you higher leverage. So you'll be able to get more money back on the cash out, but it'll also help you with the interest rate as it would affect the cash flow of that property. So if we know that a tenant is going to be coming, that's good. But really, ideally, what you want is to get a tenant in there by the day of the appraisal. Now, whether that tenant's been in there for 3 months or if they got there 2 days before the appraiser, as long as they're in there, then we can at least show that there is occupancy, which is going to help the borrower, not only for the leverage, but the interest rate in the long run.
Guys, that's all the questions I have. If there's any more, please submit them. If there's anything else, Connor, that you'd like to announce, please, if there's anything that's coming up with RCN, any events or any of your own webinars, it's a good time to let the people know.
Yeah. So I do want to touch on these other common questions real quick, but I do also have a few things to talk about for RCN. So some of the other common questions that we're going to get are things as, can you send the money straight to the contractor? So the answer to that is going to be no. Really, the payments are just made directly to the borrower. So it is the borrower's responsibility to pay the contractors from there. Another common question is how long it actually takes to get the money after making a draw request. So the answer for that is going to be 5 to 7 business days. And then touching back to where I talked earlier about the beginning of the draw process, when do you get the rehab money? You would need to complete the rehab first, whatever percentage or section of it that is. And then once that's completed, then we're able to reimburse that rehab budget. Now, as for things for RCN, we actually do have a program called Amplify, which really kind of goes into our programs in more detail. Amplify is a training program that we've been developing. And at the moment, we are currently working on creating more and more complex programs for each sort of program. So for example, for this ARV program that we've been talking about today, there's going to be a beginner section, there's going to be an intermediate, and then there will be an expert once we have that released. So this really is just a great way for you to understand RCN's process, as well as things like where there will be hits to leverage, ways that you can increase your leverage, tips for closing faster. It's really just an overall useful product to make your process with RCN much smoother and increase your understanding of how we look at loans.
Nancy also had a follow-up. I think she was trying to answer it as well. But I'm going to read Nancy's last question. What happens when there is not a tenant in the property? Is there grace in paying back until the tenant is in place? Since it is a special program, you are offering knowing the payment is dependent on having a tenant. And she wrote back, the objective is to have a tenant in there in theory, but reality doesn't not always work out that way. Is that the same? Do you agree with that, Connor? The objective is to have a tenant in there in theory, but reality does not always work out this way.
Yeah, so the property wouldn't need to be fully occupied. Really just the occupancy is going to make more of a difference when it comes to the leverage. So if it's not totally full, that's okay, but that would be a hit to the interest rate and the potential leverage that you would be able to get from that, which is why I strongly recommend getting that tenant in there, because when you take that cash out refinance, that cash that you're drawing out of the property is largely going to be used for, or not largely, but commonly going to be used for putting a down payment or paying for closing costs for an additional property where they would repeat this process. So the answer is we can do it, but I don't recommend doing it.
I just want to let everybody know that Connor will be back. RCN Capital with Connor Hibbs will be back in a month, and we will be promoting the video along with what he's going to be talking about next month. Next month will be rent and refinance, how to start the process of refinancing your property, RCN's capital long-term financing options, and how to qualify for the best terms. When is the appropriate time to refinance? How to seamlessly transition from short-term financing to long-term financing in as little time as possible. These will be the topics. This is what will be discussed in the following month. But again, I want to thank you all for registering for this webinar with RCN Capital. Again, it is a 3-month series. We will be forwarding to everybody a copy of this video for the many that were not able to join us today. And we will definitely be including Connor's email address so you can reach out to him before we have him back on next month. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. Thank you very much. Connor, if you want to say the last few words, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I really look forward to continuing doing this webinar series.
Connor, before you go, I think I have 2 more questions. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
They just came rolling in. Fee, this is fee questions, okay?
Yes.
The legal fee that covers, the legal fee that covers credit check, background check, is a one-time fee or is it for each draw?
So the legal
This
fee is so the legal fee is separate from the other $89 fee. So there's 2 fees there. So the $89 fee is going to be, it's going to cover the credit check, background check, and experience verification. Now that is going to be something that we can reuse if it's within 90 days, or if we're doing like several loans in a row with this person over a short period of time, that's something where we can reuse that a little bit. However, the legal fee, that's only going to pop up on a closing. So neither of those 2 are going to be involved with any of the draw process. So those fees aren't involved in the draw process at all. For the draw, it's really just going to be that $199 and $25, which is going to be incorporated into the rehab budget. Now, I would like to mention, and the reason why I didn't put the number there for the legal fee is that in everywhere other than New York State, the legal fee is going to be $995. In New York State, and I'm sure that you all know with all of the extensive paperwork that they need, it's going to be $995 plus an additional 1/4% of the total loan. So that would be a 0.0025% of the loan, or not percent, but 0.0025 of the loan. So that's really the reason for that.
Connor, we have another question here. Do you or anybody within RCN Capital, do you guys yourself, do you have your own investment properties? Has the bank themselves participated in the BRRRR program?
Yeah, so I am aware that we have several loan officers who have looked more into investment properties. I myself don't currently have any. I would like to, but I got to work a little bit harder to be able to get there. But yeah, we do have people within the company that have investment properties.
And Nancy's last question is, he or has he ever been a landlord? And that would also go for your firm as well.
Yeah, so again, me personally, I have not, but we do have plenty of people in the company that do have investment properties where they are the landlord.
Got another question here, Corey. What do people at RCN do for their financing that are investors? What do the people at RCN do for their financing that are investors? From Corey Kessler.
To my understanding, they largely use our programs for it. So whether it's going to be a long-term purchase or using this BRRRR strategy to rehab a property and then refinance out into a long-term rental, they'll typically be using our programs.
Once again, I want to thank you all for joining us and learning all about the BRRRR strategy with RCN Capital and Connor Hibbs. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me again. It was a pleasure.